Welcome to Sightings. I'm Tim White. On a past edition of Sightings, we introduced you to Nick Pope, the British Defense Ministry's former point man for UFO investigations. When I first interviewed Pope last year, he told me that he was a non-believer until one extraordinary UFO report changed his mind completely. It's a case little known outside of England, but one that has the power to turn skeptics into true believers. Nick Pope has been transferred away from the UFO desk at the Ministry of Defense, but his book, Open Skies, Closed Minds, has him once again at the center of Britain's UFO debate. It's an unlikely position for a man who started out as a dyed-in-the-wool skeptic.
When I started the UFO job at the Ministry of Defense, I really didn't know what I was letting myself in for. I came in as a skeptic and with very little knowledge of what it was all about.
Then, one startling report, and Nick Pope was never the same again.
I'd been doing the UFO job for a year or so when a case came along which really changed my perception on the whole UFO mystery. It occurred on the 30th and the 31st of March 1993, and it was without doubt one of the most major waves of sightings that Britain had ever seen.
At 1:05 a.m., March 31st, 1993, the report began, radar did not detect a massive UFO in British airspace. There were military and police eyewitnesses and impeccable documentation.
There were dozens of witnesses all over the country. Many of them, because this was late at night, were police officers on night patrol and military personnel on guard duty.
UFO investigator Doug Cooper was awakened at 2:20 that morning by a shaken Cornwall police sergeant who described what he and others had just seen.
The object was black, and it appeared to be shaped either something like a wedge shape or a delta wing shape, or indeed like a catamaran, a twin-hulled craft. There were lights on this craft, which they appeared to be at either end of it, which they described as about 500 feet apart.
At the Ministry of Defense, Nick Pope was being inundated with questions about the UFO's origins.
I launched a full inquiry into this. I made a series of very detailed checks to try and find a prosaic explanation for this. I checked aircraft movements, satellite tracks, airships, weather balloons, but after an extremely detailed inquiry that took me several weeks, I drew a complete blank. This was a genuine unknown.
Pope and Cooper persevered, in large part because of the sheer number of reliable eyewitnesses. Pope pored over the reports of Devon Patrol officers Barry Mitchell and Gus Cotty, who observed the UFO near the Bristol Channel.
Gus and I both sort of looked at each other, and Gus stopped the car and we got out.
I've never seen anything like that before.
Certainly, three lights that we saw, I certainly formed the opinion that they were fixed to the same object, albeit I couldn't see any object, travelling at the same speed, and had it been a conventional sized aircraft, it would have been a deafening noise. It was probably in our view for about 30 seconds.
It was really strange, yeah. Those are the three lights in the position, and that's our vehicle. You just don't know what to say, do you? It's the first time you come across something like that.
Their notes and drawings only came out after they discovered they were not alone.
It's very difficult to come out of the closet, so to speak, and talk about these things openly. So Barry and I decided not to say anything initially, but then another officer in Cornwall came up over the radio and said that he had seen these lights. So once it had broken the ice, we just then said, well, yeah, we've seen them as well. And then other officers came across the radio as well to say that they'd seen the lights as well.
In fact, police all over southern England were calling dispatch with UFO sightings of their own.
The other officers who saw these lights, albeit some of those officers were in excess of 60 or 70 miles away from where we were, the timing of their sighting was exactly the same as the timing of our sighting, which, putting the whole thing together, makes it even further a bigger mystery.
Police officers are reliable. They're not given to flights of fancy, as far as we're concerned. They reported something which they're seeing, which they don't understand. This is basically what we're talking about. It's an object which they can't identify with. And I suppose to some extent, rather alarmed them.
At MOD, Pope read secret Air Force documents and discovered that the RAF was just as baffled as he.
He realised that something had happened, and he seems to have gone out of his way to be as helpful as he possibly could by sending me a letter with the map on it, of course. We've never had this before from anybody in that position.
Not only did Pope send a map showing when and how the UFO had traveled, he also included where. A complete list of sightings locations, including several military installations, something only the Defense Ministry knew. Pope did it because he felt the UFO posed a serious threat. Something had flown into England, and military radar didn't catch it.
I ordered the radar tapes to be impounded and sent to me in my office. I then sat down, viewed them, and then brought in an air defense expert to have another look. We were clear that there was nothing on the tape. This was very worrying. We'd got reports from military personnel of a sizable craft operating very low over 2 of our military bases, and there was nothing on radar. So we never had any warning, and we never even got our air defense aircraft into the air.
The MOD are faced with a situation where they have an object flying across our counties, and they have no way of detecting it. Whether they're alien craft or otherwise is another matter. But the fact is that an unknown craft right across these counties, and the RAF do not appear to have picked it up on their radar.
If a structured craft of unknown origin has evaded detection by the Royal Air Force, the implications are global. If the world's air defense systems cannot respond, what will?
That's got to be extremely worrying, and that's got to mean that this whole UFO sighting is a matter of extreme defense significance. The party line, the Ministry of Defense standard view, is that UFOs are of no defense significance. Now, after this incident, I didn't have much time for that standard line. I felt it simply didn't stand up to the facts, and it was from this point that my views on the whole UFO phenomenon began to change, and I began to realize that it wasn't just lights in the sky. It couldn't be explained, and there may well be some extraterrestrial explanation to a hardcore of these UFO sightings.
We asked the Ministry of Defense for comment on this report. The MOD's official response states that while they remain open-minded about the possible existence of flying saucers, they, quote, remain unaware of any evidence which proves that these phenomena exist, unquote.
Next, why moonwalker Edgar Mitchell turned to the paranormal for answers about our world.
That mind is interactive with nature. It's a part of nature. It's inseparable.
We talked about Mitchell's remarkable spiritual transformation after his flight to the moon. And in this, the second part of that report, we continue our conversation with Ed Mitchell and learn that in many ways he is still very much an explorer.
My whole purpose in my life, turns out, is that of an explorer, to discover.
This is Edgar Mitchell, the cosmic explorer, one of only 12 men to stand on the moon and look back on Earth as a true extraterrestrial. When Apollo 14 returned to Earth, Edgar Mitchell was a different man. A lifelong curiosity about the power of the mind and humankind's purpose in the cosmos became an obsession. And from that day to this, Mitchell has been a seeker of new truths. He's a different kind of explorer now, an astronaut who has seen the big picture and documents his journey to understand it.
How should people understand what happened to you on the way back? Your epiphany. Were you struck on the road to Damascus, or was it a process that you went through?
Everybody has been through moments of great discovery in their own life, one way or another, something that's, aha, oh, wow, isn't that neat? This was just that same experience multiplied a few times over.
Most people don't spend 25 years working to find out what that moment of discovery meant, and you have. Why?
There was an impulse within me to find out what all of this meant. This experience was so curious And I think being a pretty good scientist and a pretty good explorer, I said, this doesn't fit my answers. Let's go find out why my answers are wrong. So, and it's taken 25 years to come to a new answer.
It began with Mitchell's sense that there must be a universal connection between all things. Neither science nor religion had all the answers, he felt. So, for the past 20 years, questions formulated in outer space have been explored at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, founded by Mitchell and currently under the direction of Winston Franklin.
One of the really fascinating things about the Institute is that in that moment in the spaceship, Edgar Mitchell got a very complete picture of what the Institute should be. In other words, he realized that it was to be an integration of science and spirituality.
The old model says the mind doesn't matter, that only the laws of nature, which are immutable, physics matter. That's it. Your proposition is that not only does the mind matter, it is inseparable from the laws of physics.
The bottom line today is that mind is interactive with nature. It's a part of nature. It's inseparable. The universe we're in is a self-organizing, trial and error, learning, intelligent, interactive universe. And that's quite a different model than we had 20 years ago.
Much of this new reality is based on personal experiences, which have led Mitchell to respect the potential of mind over matter. He calls it intentionality, the power of the mind to deliberately change reality. When Edgar Mitchell's mother developed glaucoma and became blind without her glasses, doctors said there was little they could do, so Mitchell brought his mother to a Tibetan healer.
I didn't know whether it was real, not real, but he was impressive, and mother was having a problem, so my devious little mind said, get them together.
The results of the 20-minute healing session were not immediately apparent.
6 o'clock the next morning, my mother came rushing into my room, waked me up out of sleep, had her Bible in one hand, her glasses in the other, proceeded to read her scripture. She was a very religious woman, and said, praise the Lord, I can see, son, I can see. Then dropped her glasses on the floor, ground them under her foot, and said again, praise the Lord, I can see.
Mitchell was impressed by the effect of the healing. Then, a week later, something even more startling happened. His mother asked if the healer was a Christian, and was devastated when Mitchell told her that he was a Buddhist.
The next day, she went back to get her glasses. She couldn't see. So the belief system, the mind, really had a lot to do with that.
Apollo 13 nearly suffered a tragedy of untold proportions. They almost didn't make it back. Whole crew almost lost in space. The entire Earth praying that something works out in a particular way, could that have an effect on their return?
I certainly think so. From everything we've learned, the non-local desires, the intentions, the wishes of that many people, absolutely. We watch the intentions, the kindly, healing, loving intentions of people have an effect on traumatized, ill people time after time after time.
Through published studies, the Institute of Noetic Sciences has helped mainstream alternative techniques like biofeedback and acupuncture. Now, an ambitious project is underway to change the way our brains perceive the world.
And that global mind change is a change in worldview of everybody on the planet, so that principally we see our interconnectedness. We realize that we are part of something much bigger, that we're connected with all life, that it is a purposeful existence, and that there is meaning.
Edgar Mitchell's explorations may have turned inward, a pursuit he highly recommends. But the former astronaut still encourages his son, and kids everywhere, to push back the frontiers of space. And Mitchell has also drawn some startling conclusions about Earth's place in the metagalactic community.
If there were extraterrestrial life keeping an eye on what's going on Earth, what would the intention of life from elsewhere be toward us?
Well, we can only speculate on that, but we can extend our own experience since we're now a spacefaring civilization. We are stewards of this planet. We need to be responsible for it. And perhaps our visitors, if they are real, are looking at us and saying, well, which way are these guys going to go? Are they going to be so dumb-headed and unconscious that their behavior destroys the planet? Or are they going to wake up, become conscious, become planetary citizens, become cosmic citizens, and make this a cosmic civilization and join the rest of the community?
Edgar Mitchell is not the only Apollo astronaut to walk a spiritual path after his walk on the moon. Alan Bean, the fourth man to walk on the moon, has become a painter, creating dreamy galactic scenes. James Irwin, who walked on the moon in 1971, became a minister after his flight and is a religious explorer who searched for traces of Noah's Ark. And Charles Duke, who followed Irwin to the moon, is now a Christian missionary. News. Until recently, dedicated ufologists needed to make a trip to the National Archives in Washington or file copious Freedom of Information requests to get any information at all about government knowledge of UFOs. That is all about to change with the click of a mouse. On the World Wide Web, the Periscope is giving users a virtual almanac of up-to-the-minute UFO reports. From black helicopters to Area 51, this website is dedicated to providing information on UFOs, conspiracies, cryptic creatures, and cutting-edge science. Click on one of 4 major icons and find out the latest paranormal facts and figures from around the world. The Matrix link is devoted to conspiracies and cover-ups. Nebula is a continuing update on UFO sightings and alien encounters. Enigma catalogs paranormal phenomena. And Dossier has declassified government documents. Take an alien abduction survey, visit the image gallery, or click on the Freedom of Information Act Help Center. From there, you can FOIA almost any government agency, from the National Security Council to the White House. Periscope has up-to-date links, data, and images. Available at www.periscope.com. In Henderson, Minnesota, children have discovered what may be the latest installment of Gaia's revenge.
I looked at them and then there's no legs or arms.
In this protected wetland, middle school students have made a shocking discovery. Over 50% of the frogs here suffer from bizarre mutations. Scientists called in to help have documented abnormalities ranging from extra limbs, missing legs, to eyes in the throat. Amphibian biologist Dr. Robert McKinnell feels that this may be a warning to human beings.
This would suggest that something was affecting their DNA. It could be due to parasites. We don't know the answers to that. But it could also be due to a chemical. We do not know.
Biologists recognize these frogs as an indicator species because they process toxins in much the same way humans do.
What happens to frogs might happen similarly to humans. Some people have said the frog is like a canary in a mine. If frogs are dying in our environment, where do we go?
The Minnesota Pollution Control Agency and environmentalists fear that there could be a link between pollution, global warming, toxins, and mutant frogs. Beware, some scientists warn, because deformities may be only the first step toward global mutation.
Let me tell you that their detoxification mechanism is failing the frogs, and since the frog detoxification mechanism is very similar to ours, then our protective mechanism may similarly fail.
So far, no one knows exactly why newborn frogs are turning into these freaks of nature. But they are, and not just here. Biologists have discovered similar amphibian deformities in more than 150 locations around the world. And time may be running out. After the frogs, what will be next? We'll have more stories in the news next time. Now, here's what's coming up as Sightings continues.
I really feel bad for you guys because there's so much injustice here.
A psychic experiment.
The spirit never dies. After the body's gone, the life force lives on. It either crosses over to another plane of existence, or it remains on Earth to clear up any unfinished business. Apparently, there is much to clear up at one historic site in Nevada, where witnesses say many restless spirits are trying to make contact. This is where the spirits walk, people say. Here, among the abandoned stone buildings at the old Stewart Indian School, just outside Carson City, Nevada. Tribespeople in Stewart have preserved a portion of the site as a museum and cultural resource center, but most of the campus remains the same as it did in 1930. There are secrets behind these boarded windows and the belief that school children, long dead, are still here.
I have seen 2 children that are playing on the grass, but as I keep walking, I turn back to look at them. They're no longer there.
Mike Perez is a member of the Miwok tribe. He speaks for many people who have grown up in this area and have watched the spirit children.
They seem to be playing with each other, rolling around with each other, and when you take a second look, they're no longer there. They have gone.
The ephemeral scenes are described as poignant, spiritual, never frightening. But there's a different feeling in the basement of the old administration building. Here, the spirit of an older white male is said to defend his otherworldly territory with an iron fist. He is called the superintendent because he is thought to be the spirit of a ruthless school official.
I can't say what it is, but there's definitely something in the basement.
Bo Sargent is a former cultural center administrator. Some of his ancestors attended the school.
You get a really weird feeling as you're going down the stairs, and there was a really bad odor underneath the stairs. I felt scared. My whole body was just nothing but goosebumps, and my hair was standing, and like that odor, that was the odor that I smelled down there seemed to stay right inside my nose.
I turned around, and within a blink of an eye, there was a tall gentleman that I believe is the superintendent that lived here, walked through me, my left shoulder. He was tall, thin, dark clothes. I think he was wearing glasses, and it just happened very fast. I've heard stories that he stands in front of the fireplace and with a blanket wrapped around him, and he shivers, he's cold, trying to get warm.
There's a lot of emotion attached to this place due to what happened when the school first opened. And you speak with the elders now who come into the museum, and they have this fear of coming back to this school, of what went on during that time when they were little kids coming here.
I am certain that energy in turmoil is energy in turmoil. It's just that. And I think that what a lot of these people have seen are the remains of that energy. Unresolved conflict, unsolved murders, unsolved questions, unpunished perpetrators of horrible deeds.
Sightings was granted permission to bring psychic investigator Jorianne DeFrey to the old school to see if she could ease the pain of the spirits here.
I believe that when I do this work, I allow the universal energies to flow through me, to give me all the information that's necessary to help any situation.
But she was not prepared for the secrets revealed to her.
I was grief-stricken. I was caught up in an emotional state for quite a while that even when I left the land, I was at the point of tears.
Jorianne's work is usually matter-of-fact, recording psychic impressions on tape, then taking copious notes. But this case reached deep into Jorianne's being. And when she met Susie Lisa, Jorianne could no longer keep her businesslike demeanor.
Some of my staff are bothered by the superintendent, and if there's some way to make it so he doesn't bother my staff.
What it appears to be is that he is not who you think he is. He is not one man. He is an accumulation of energies that have come through him, him being like a channel, okay? And all this negativity and everything else just seemed to like well up in him. I don't know if there's been slaughter on this property. I don't know what's going on here, but the loss is overwhelming. I believe that the government has had stuff to do here or something. I don't know if this land has changed hands or whatever, but what was once yours will be yours again, like that. Okay, does that make sense to you?
Completely.
A lot of people died here, just unbelievable. A lot of people also, somewhere, were cut down in their prime.
Yes, these are the children you're talking about.
I really feel bad for you guys, because there's so much injustice here.
Then, Jorianne began to give specific information about what happened to the children.
You're correct, but I cannot put this on camera. We can't use this. She's absolutely correct. I feel for her, but I cannot allow that to be aired. I feel terrible that you did hit that, but there's no way you can use that. We are aware of what's there.
Sightings agreed to respect the wishes of the Cultural Center and not air Jorianne's revelations. She had hit on certain truths that many people hold sacred, and to divulge them would mean interfering with ongoing healing practices now being conducted. What can be told is the school's tragic place in Native American history. The Stewart School was established after the infamous slaughter at Wounded Knee in 1890. It was built by the U.S. government to address what was termed, quote, the Indian problem. Children here were acculturated, converted to Christianity, taught English and other subjects that U.S. officials promised would civilize the savages.
In the early times, from 1890 to about 1930, it was a roundup, a wholesale roundup, much like you'd gather unbranded cattle. And some of the children were actually even brought here in cattle cars. So the process was a mandatory roundup.
In that era, children who were taken to the Stewart School never went home again. Children as young as 2 were forcibly taken from the family they would never see again. Eventually, the school became a source of pride when tribespeople began exerting their rights and influence. So it is only now that survivors and ancestors are discovering the depth of brutality in the early years when, they claim, children were not students, but POWs.
In spite of a lot of the activity that was ongoing here, there were children who either ran away or who survived it or who helped other children live through it. And they lived long enough to tell us about it.
When Jorianne went into the superintendent's basement, she felt that this was ground zero for the activity.
Oh, I'm going to tell you right away. The sense that I get in here is like this, you know, don't come in here. All right, don't come into this room, okay? God help you if you should go in this room, okay? Like something or somebody is going to get you. It's like what happened down here. A sense of just bad stuff, just bad stuff. The emotions coming up, the fear, the fear, the wanting to run, the fright, and then you know, knowing that they're trapped. Why aren't they here? You know, who's not here to like save us? You know, and then having to run. And no one is here. Somebody on the other side holds the children's hands, okay? There's like a school of the children of the dead, and they sit all by the water, waiting for you to come talk to them. Does this make sense to you? Okay. You have to be their mom right now.
I understand.
Okay.
As they parted, Jorianne felt a sense of renewed peace, knowing that the caretakers of the old school will not only preserve this historic site, but also that they will take care of children who still cry out from the other side.
We honor the spirits of the children who are here. We love them.
Witnesses who claim to have seen the spirit known as the superintendent report that he's always cold and is often seen by the fire trying to warm him.
Interested in Mars? Why are we interested in our neighbors? Why do boys fall in love with the girl next door? It's the planet next door. It's the only one we know of that might someday be made habitable for human colonists, for human life.
Our romantic fascination with Mars and creatures that might dwell there began in the 19th century when an imaginative astronomer showed the world what that tiny red speck looked like up close and said there were canals there.
When Schiaparelli said, I can see channels, there are lines on the surface, I think that was the beginning of the mass interest in Mars. Those canals were really the big kicker.
Once Schiaparelli said that there might be life on Mars, the stage was set for all-out Martian hysteria, culminating with the broadcast of War of the Worlds in 1938. The radio play was fiction, but thousands of people believed we were under Martian attack.
That night was a disaster in the New York area because a lot of people thought, my gosh, this is really happening. And it was such a powerful impact that ever since then, the story of the Martian invasion has become one of the basic American popular culture mythology stories.
And now a new Martian invasion is underway. Earth meets Mars on its own turf when NASA's first camera-laden probe lands in 1997. And the mission after that is already on the drawing board.
We're going to be trying to send a little rolling geologist to Mars. The rolling geologist is basically a rover that's capable of taking a pickaxe and breaking a rock. It might not be a pickaxe, but basically the same function to try and break open a rock. Since we're looking for life in the long run, we may send an instrument to see if there are organics in the rocks.
But before the first remote-controlled robot can land on Mars, a NASA team led by mission architect Dr. Mark Adler must invent a whole new kind of technology.
The kind of technologies that we're going to need to be able to do this mission are, in large part, non-existent. We have to develop a lot of new technologies, and we're just going to barrel ahead and take the risk and hope that we can do it and plan the missions to use those technologies.
Even as Adler's work begins, others are already thinking about a manned mission before 2012.
The current idea for sending people to Mars would be to send a factory to the Martian surface first, a robot factory that would suck in the very tenuous, very sparse Martian air into tanks and possibly pull some water out from the soil and combine these with chemicals brought from Earth to create a reservoir of air, water, and rocket fuel, waiting for the astronauts to land on the surface and live using these materials, and then use the rocket fuel to come home.
Astronautical engineer and NASA consultant Dr. Robert Zubrin believes that the first humans on Mars will not be who you'd think.
On initial missions to Mars, I recommend a crew of 4. 4 is the minimum number you can have that you can split the crew up into 2 groups and have nobody be alone. The most critical skill on a Mars mission is that of flight mechanic. The second most important person on the mission is the field scientist. You don't need someone whose primary training is that of pilot, because the spacecraft can actually be piloted in an automatic fashion. We don't need a navigator, certainly. We do interplanetary navigation without navigators on board. We certainly wouldn't want to have someone whose sole occupation is that of command, although someone will be in command, okay? And we don't need a doctor, okay? Because the entire crew will be trained in first aid. So in Star Trek terminology, what we'd bring is 2 Scotties and 2 Spocks. No Kirks, McCoys, Sulus, or Uhurus need apply.
According to Dr. Zubrin, in The Case for Mars, humans will be homesteading on the Red Planet in the 21st century.
Mars may appear to be bleak, but in fact there does exist on Mars every resource that is needed to support not just life, but a new branch of human civilization. Mars has water. It's frozen, but it's there. It's got carbon dioxide, it's got nitrogen, it's got sulfur and calcium and phosphorus and silicon and iron and titanium and aluminum. It's got everything you need to grow food, to make plastics, ceramics, glasses, metals, okay, everything. And if you can go to Mars and develop the know-how that allows you to turn those elements into useful objects, you turn Mars into a habitable planet.
What was once a hotly contested space race is now a global effort, and it may well be that it takes another planet to finally unite the people of Earth.
When we go to Mars, we're going up a new world to humanity. We're not going there to, do flags and footprints like Apollo. We're going there, okay, to explore a world and pioneer a world and create the first seeds of a new branch of human civilization.
Last November, the Global Surveyor and Pathfinder were not alone in their race for Mars. Russia also launched an unmanned probe and Martian rover called Mars 96. That probe crashed.
Police officers are reliable, and they're not given to flights of fancy as far as we're concerned. They reported something which they're seeing, which they don't understand. This is basically what we're talking about. It's an object which they can't identify with. And I suppose to some extent, rather alarmed them.
At MOD, Pope read secret Air Force documents and discovered that the RAF was just as baffled as he.
He realized that something had happened. And he seems to have gone out of his way to be as helpful as he possibly could by sending me a letter with the map on it, of course. We've never had this before. from anybody in that position.
Not only did Pope send a map showing when and how the UFO had traveled, he also included where. A complete list of sightings locations, including several military installations, something only the Defense Ministry knew. Pope did it because he felt the UFO posed a serious threat. Something had flown into England, and military radar didn't catch it.
I ordered the radar tapes to be impounded and sent to me in my office. I then sat down, viewed them, and then brought in an air defense expert to have another look. We were clear that there was nothing on the
Welcome to Sightings. I'm Tim White. On a past edition of Sightings, we introduced you to Nick Pope, the British Defense Ministry's former point man for UFO investigations. When I first interviewed Pope last year, he told me that he was a non-believer until one extraordinary UFO report changed his mind completely. It's a case little known outside of England, but one that has the power to turn skeptics into true believers. Nick Pope has been transferred away from the UFO desk at the Ministry of Defense, but his book, Open Skies, Closed Minds, has him once again at the center of Britain's UFO debate. It's an unlikely position for a man who started out as a dyed-in-the-wool skeptic.
When I started the UFO job at the Ministry of Defense, I really didn't know what I was letting myself in for. I came in as a skeptic and with very little knowledge of what it was all about.
Then, one startling report, and Nick Pope was never the same again.
I'd been doing the UFO job for a year or so when a case came along which really changed my perception on the whole UFO mystery. It occurred on the 30th and the 31st of March 1993, and it was without doubt one of the most major waves of sightings that Britain had ever seen.
At 1:05 a.m., March 31st, 1993, the report began, radar did not detect a massive UFO in British airspace. There were military and police eyewitnesses and impeccable documentation.
There were dozens and dozens of witnesses all over the country. Many of them, because this was late at night, were police officers on night patrol and military personnel on guard duty.
UFO investigator Doug Cooper was awakened at 2:20 that morning by a shaken Cornwall police sergeant who described what he and others had just seen.
The object was black, and it appeared to be shaped either something like a wedge shape or a delta wing shape, or indeed like a catamaran, a twin-hulled craft. There were lights on this.
And had it been a conventional sized aircraft, it would have been a deafening noise. It was probably in our view for about 30 seconds.
It was really strange, yeah. Those are the three lights in the position, and that's our vehicle. You just don't know what to say, do you? It's the first time you come across something like that.
Their notes and drawings only came out after they discovered they were not alone.
It's very difficult to come out of the closet, so to speak, and talk about these things openly. So Barry and I decided not to say anything initially, but then another officer in Cornwall came up over the radio and said that he had seen these lights. So once he had broken the ice, we just then said, oh yeah, we've seen them as well. And then other officers came across the radio as well to say that they'd seen the lights as well.
In fact, police all over southern England were calling dispatch with UFO sightings of their own.
The other officers who saw these lights, albeit some of those officers were in excess of 60 or 70 miles away from where we were, the timing of their sighting was exactly the same as the timing of our sighting, which, putting the whole thing together, makes it even further a bigger mystery.
On this craft, which they appeared to be at either end of it, which they described as about 500 feet apart.
At the Ministry of Defense, Nick Pope was being inundated with questions about the UFO's origins.
I launched a full inquiry into this. I made a series of very detailed checks to try and find a prosaic explanation for this. I checked aircraft movements, satellite tracks, airships, weather balloons, but after an extremely detailed inquiry that took me several weeks, I drew a complete blank. This was a genuine unknown.
Pope and Cooper persevered, in large part because of the sheer number of reliable eyewitnesses. Pope pored over the reports of Devon Patrol officers Barry Mitchell and Gus Cotty, who observed the UFO near the Bristol Channel.
Gus and I both sort of looked at each other, and Gus stopped the car, and we got out.
I've never seen anything like that before.
Certainly, the three lights that we saw, I certainly formed the opinion that they were fixed to the same object, albeit I couldn't see any object, travelling at the same speed.